why? The Hadith of Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, do not make your houses a graveyard. Graveyard. I mean, Sunnah supposed to be. And honestly, as I read after Salat al-Isha, it says an honor to have a new Muslim speaker about what? The greatest human being after Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And who? The Sahaba, the companion of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the great Sahaba. We finished Umar Abu Bakr Siddiq, and the thing, Brother Yusuf, I'm not praising him. To speak about him is really touched my heart. Yes, we love the Sahaba, especially the four Imams. We know that. The way he speaks about Umar, Abu Bakr Siddiq, touched my heart. Today we're going to speak also the greatest Sahaba, Umar radiallahu anhu, Umar al-Faruq. The one he distinguished between the false and the Islam, and the true Islam and non-Islam. And something very important, I don't know whether you should speak about it or not. Umar radiallahu anhu got killed, but the same Shia right now, they insulting Umar ibn Khattab. Whoever insults any of the Sahaba, he is absolutely out of the circle of Islam. He's not a Muslim, period. That means, pay attention here. Haram to eat from his food. Because we eat from Christian and Jews, but not those people. Imagine that. Not our time with the Brother Yusuf, an honor to speak about the greatest Sahaba, inshallah.
You said I was new. It was 14 years, I guess.
It's been new, according to your age.
Yeah. I've been quite a long journey in all of this, and a lot of education, a lot of books, a lot of studying going on over the years. And hope everybody so far enjoyed the Abu Bakr. We're going in time. I found when I first got into this religion that I found so many of the books, they stopped after you got done with the seerah. It's almost like what happened afterwards, most people were unaware of. So I felt there really was an urgent need for us to go out and cover the origins of all this, how Islam progressed, what challenges were there after the death of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So we touched on Abu Bakr Siddiq. We did 2 parts. We went on to his life. We looked at the challenges that he faced and how instrumental he was in keeping everything together at a time when you had rampant, apostasy. You had people leaving. You had Islam could have been destroyed, within 1 month, within 2 months, and how important he was at holding it together. Tonight, we get into a man who his life story has always touched my heart, more so than Abu Bakr, because as a human being, I relate more to Umar ibn Khattab, because I was a Catholic. I was an atheist. I was someone who drank alcohol. I was someone who cursed people who believed in God. I was the least person you would think would be sitting up here today in 2023 talking about any matters like this. So I have definitely a connection that I've always had to his life story and his journey, more so than I've had towards people who were always good. I mean, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creates us with different paths, different qadrs, different destinations. And we're going to explore the life in 3 parts. As the Sheikh, very, very good introduction there of one of the most illustrious men in human history. A man who had so many layers to his personality, so many nuances to him. When you hear the average person talk about Umar ibn al-Khattab, what do they always say? He was tough. He was alpha, if you will. He was, use the word badass. That's the language, basically. But that's kind of the language in English that we would hear, But there's a lot more to him. And we are going to be seeing tonight, we are going to start with his origins, his humble origins, as someone who herded camels and sheep, who was abused by his father. And we are going to leave off with him being the Khalifa. In part 2, we are going to look at all of his virtues and how he ran the Islamic State, the compassion that people did not think he had. A simple dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him more compassion than arguably many men in human history. We are going to look at part 3, as our illustrious Sheikh here said, his untimely demise, his martyrdom, his ascendancy, to immortality when he was fatally stabbed. Obviously, we're going to talk about his triumph at Jerusalem, and we are going to go through how he expanded the Islamic kingdom. This man had a caliphate of 10 years. Abu Bakr had only a caliphate, unfortunately, of 2. So you have a lot more to cover when we get into the life of Umar than we did with Abu Bakr, but the virtues are the same. Abu Bakr was the man we needed at that time. Umar was the man that we needed for these 10 years, and you're going to see why as we continue to escalate. So with that being said, we will begin. As I called Umar in my introduction, he was the Islamic alpha. You know, we hear the term now loosely thrown around in modern society, oh, he's an alpha male. And most people don't even have an idea what that even means. Now an alpha male is a man who has multiple girlfriends, he drives a nice car, he's got a lot of money, he walks around in a very arrogant manner. You know, but traditionally speaking, an alpha male meant a man who was gentle, intelligent, but also strong, also fierce. He was fierce with his enemies and loving and kind to his friends and his allies. He was a multidimensional man. He was a man to be revered, to be admired. So when I refer to Umar tonight as the Islamic alpha, that is the context that I'm using that word. Again, you go to social media now, everybody wants to be an alpha male. You'll see some guy with 10 gold chains and a car behind him, and he'll say he's an alpha. You know, that's not what a real alpha male is. An alpha man is someone who takes care of business in a moral and ethical way. Again, I said he was the man Islam needed. What went on during his time? The Muslim kingdom was blessed like it had never been blessed before. At the time that Umar died, there were 13,000 masjids in circulation at that time. 13,000. Just 12 to 13 years before, what, 2, 3? I mean, just in this decade, the Islamic State went from a small city known as Medina to having reach into present-day Iraq, to Egypt, and to the beginning of ultimately Jerusalem and what we call Sham, you know, to this day. Umar saw his ummah flooded with riches, with the life was becoming easy for them. The temptations were there. They needed someone who was tough, who was strict, to be their leader during that period of time. We are going to see as we get on into the series is how that would become a problem in the Islamic Ummah as we progressed. As more cultures came in, they brought pre-existing beliefs, they brought philosophies, they brought all their pagan practices and started intertwining it with a religion. But what Umar was dealing with was more of the wealth and the abundance and the quality of life improving. So Umar was born 13 years after the year of the elephant. We keep using that as a reference because what happened in the year of the elephant? Who was born? We talked about Abu Bakr, 2 years, was a contemporary of the Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, 2 years after the year of the elephant. So here we have Umar, 13 years. So we're looking at being born in 583, according to most sources. This is the number that I had came up with. He was described as a tall, muscular man, white reddish skin, bald head. He had a very long beard, a long mustache. He had a domineering presence. We'll get to some praise that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had heaped on him later for that presence that he commanded. The shaitan would flee when he saw Umar strutting down the walkway. That was the way he carried himself. He was very strong in wrestling and other sports. You know, growing up, he was we say an athlete, you know, of his day. He was one of those guys that you saw him in the market, you didn't want to cross, you didn't want to mess with him. So early in his life, about half of his years, we could say, were spent in Jahiliyyah. Working basically for his father was his upbringing. His father had him herding camels and sheep, working out in the field. Umar would say later in his day that he felt that he was always had that in his personality. It never left him. He was always a good shepherd. Now, this is where we get into some of the layers. I had said something to a friend of mine many years ago. I said, if I don't meet a man who's been through pain, I don't want to meet that man. I want to meet a man who's been through the dark side of life, because that's how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala strengthens us and builds our character. And there's a lot of statements from Umar bin al-Khattab that allude to abuse, you know, from his father, which is where we see the personality that he had, which shaped him. He was saying one time, many years later, as he was going to one of the Hajj when he was the Khalifa, he said, this is where I used to tend goats and camels for Khattab. And he was very violent, and he would beat me. If I didn't make the quota, if I didn't make the day's work, his father would beat him, you know, aggressively. And young Umar learned a lot of lessons the hard way, you can say, from that type of treatment. You found him also tending to the livestock of his aunts, paternal aunts, and family members. He was not born into wealth, but yet through his amazing ability that he had of charisma and articulation, and he also had another strong weapon. He could read and write, which was something in Jahiliyyah Arabia, which was very rare. This made him even more eloquent. He was a fond fan of poetry and used to have poems memorized and could recite poetry a drop of a hat, so to speak. He retained so many poems. And this, again, we talked about this with Abu Bakr. You can see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how he prepares you in your early life for what he needs you to do later on. By being good in poetry and having all these poems memorized, as we're going to get later when he takes his conversion, how astute he was as a scholar of the Quran. How he would memorize an ayah, and he would not even move on to the next ayah until he had firmly memorized that ayah and applied it and could recite it. And not only could he recite it, he was the first human tafsir. He could give quotes based on that. Our messenger revealed this at 9 a.m., 12 p.m. on this day while we were here in this context. So all of his skills that he had, the reading and writing at an early age, the poetry, all these things, again, set him up later on to be able to be what he was. And he also had very astute knowledge of lineages, of tribes, much like Abu Bakr did. He knew the tribes. He knew the history of his ancestors. There was a sense of pride there. And this is what made him a very firm pagan, because he took pride in his ancestry, which included their gods and their systems of worship, and why he was so just adamant, in attacking, Islam, was because he had, that passion. So he was a self-made man, became a trader, amassed quite considerable amount of wealth. He became one of the more wealthier men in Mecca, during that time. He also served as an ambassador for the Quraysh on behalf of the tribe. He was there. He was, again, very articulate, well-spoken, was good at dealing with people. So we're starting to see it come together, really who he was, pre-Islam, that he had, again, those type of traits. He had that passion. He had that toughness for Jahiliyyah that he would later demonstrate and show as he got into Islam. Now, he was known in the beginning. I told a story in the Abu Bakr documentary of him beating a slave woman who had become Muslim. He was beating this woman repeatedly, to the point the only reason he stopped was because he said his arm got tired. He would have continued to beat her. Abu Bakr Siddiq came and he purchased this lady to liberate her and took her from Umar. And Umar had told her, he said, I would have continued beating you if my arm wasn't tired. And she said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made your arm tired, and that's why you stopped beating me. But again, that showed he was seen by the Muslims as a man to be feared. This was a guy that if you tried to pray in front of the Kaaba, he would beat you. He would put his hands on you. He had it in him. He had shown that type of vigor, and passion. The first time an observer in Islam had seen, you can say, some as a foreshadowing of things to come, was during the first migration to Abyssinia. A group of Muslims, a lot of us probably know the story very well, were sent by the Prophet due to the persecutions to Ethiopia to seek refuge. And Umar had approached a woman named Abdullah. And I'm taking her statements from authentic sources, where she had said this was the first time she almost saw, you could say, a sparkle in his eye, because he was asking, where are you going? What are you doing? And she said, basically, we are being persecuted here. Our lives have been made a living hell. We have no choice but to flee, because we're not going to abandon our religion. And Umar had said, may Allah go with you. And this woman had taken that statement back and said, I saw something. First time in my life I met this man, I saw something other than, the typical persona that we had been seeing, that there was something coming out slowly but surely that would come out over time, that he was showing that first compassion, because he started to become moved. He was seeing, what are these people that are willing to abandon their homes? They're willing to abandon their property. They don't care what their family members think. They're willing to go live in a far-off country because they want to say, La ilaha illallah. It's the passion they had. So you could see early on that he had that little bit of a doubt creeping in. The events came to their head close to, you could say, the 6th year of prophethood. The Quraysh had concocted a plan. As we all know, the Quraysh had offered Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam money. They offered him rank. They offered him women. He says the famous line that we know one, you can put the sun in my right hand, the moon in my left. Every attempt they had made to bribe him, to drive him out, was not working. They had one dilemma: let's just kill him, pretty much. We are going to do it. And being the kind of man that he always was, Umar said, I got this. I want to be the one that has the honor of killing this man. So Umar gets his sword and he goes in hand to kill the messenger of Allah. When I talk about changing from kafir to Muslim, you do not get more of a change than this. This wasn't someone who just said, yeah, I disagree with those guys. No, this was a guy who was willing to take up arms and literally kill the messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, what happened next was one of those moments, we talk about the qadr of the law. And when you go and you explore your life and you look at different roads that you've taken that put you here today in this very moment, different challenges, things that you never even thought of, this one little thing was different. How different would my life be? Well, we're going to look at one of those such incidents now, but not only his life, but the future of the world. One moment happened. He's on his way, basically, to approach the messenger of Allah, who was located in an area called Dar al-Aqam, right at the foot of Al-Safa. So he's on his way, and he's approached by a gentleman by the name of Nuaym ibn Abdullah. This encounter right here changed the course of Islamic history. Because had Umar not met this man and had been stopped, he was in a straight path for exactly where the messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was. Hamza was there. Hamza had converted to Islam 3 days prior. Umar and Hamza, these are two bulls. I mean, this would have been a devastating clash. Plus, there were the men there. Umar could have been killed. History over. We would not be sitting here today. But this conversation between these two had started. And Umar had told the gentleman what his intent was, why he was going where he was going. The gentleman said, expressed, you could say, a little bit of doubt. And Umar said, when I get done with him, I'm going to come back and deal with you. I'm going to strike your neck. And that's when the brother had revealed, not only was he Muslim, but also your sister and your family members have also abandoned the religion of your fathers for this new, religion. Umar at that moment was incensed. He had lost his train of thought. He abandoned his current mission to go to the messenger of Allah, and he went to his sister's house. And that's when history changed. So as he enters basically into his sister's house, he knocks the door in. They were reading Surah Taha, during the time. And immediately a scuffle, emerges between his sister's husband and Umar. Umar, being the strong man that he was, proficient in wrestling, pinned his sister's husband to the ground, was on top of his chest, and was about to proceed to pound him. Sister jumped in, attempted to stop this, and he would take his hand and forcefully shove her in the face, causing his sister to cry, his sister's face showed blood. And then it happened. Something, we know obviously the source, the qadr of Allah took hold, and you would see the change. So the dialogue goes, as follows. Are you striking me because I worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala only? So first she asked him this question: is this the only reason you're in my house and you're hitting me? And they had the pages which he had seen of Surah Taha as he entered into the room, and he asked to read them. His sister told him, no, you're not purified. You must be cleaned. So Umar went, washed himself, and he read basically the first 8 verses of Surah Taha, and he would finish with 14 to 16, as well. And he would at this moment start weeping. And he said out loud, he says, is this what the Quraysh are fighting? Are these words what all my life and all of us are so angry? About the gist of Surah Taha that he was reciting was dealing with Allah's majesty, and they were very harmless, you can say, very beautiful, words talking about the Creator. And it touched his heart. And immediately right there on the spot, he had said to his sister, take me to Muhammad. And once they kind of gauged that his sincerity was on point, immediately They brought him to where the Messenger Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was. Hamza, of course, the security was a little bit reluctant. The Messenger had made dua just a few weeks ago.
Yes.
Yeah. He had made dua for Umar or Abu Jahl to come.
Abdullah ibn Hisham or Umar ibn Khattab. Umar or Umar. Both of them actually same. And something very important. Whether it was Taha, Surah Taha, the key, if we really not memorize the Quran, comprehend the Quran, our life change completely. Husband and wife, for example, if we understand Surah Al-Baqarah, 3.5 pages of Surah Al-Baqarah, and Surah Al-Nisa, and Surah Al-Talaq, Mumtahina, that means my wife, my life actually in household, in the safe side. The key with Umar ibn Khattab, the Quran touched his heart. That's why Brother Yusuf said, when he memorized an ayah, he applied the ayah to memorize the other ayah. Give me attention. An ayah, not surah. An ayah, and he apply it and memorize another one, and so on and so on. So Al-Baqarah take more than, ulama says, 10 years to apply Surah Al-Baqarah. Surah Al-Baqarah. Imagine that. That's why the most very important to understand the Quran. We do this every day, Salat al-Fajr, by the way. Join us.
Oh yeah, no doubt. So again, when I talked about that story, where you can see the cutter of the law, had that gentleman taken 2 or 3 more paces in a different direction, Umar ibn al-Khattab never would have went to his sister's house. He never would have found out. He never would have went to, he would have went straight to the Messenger of Allah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and bloodshed undoubtedly would have ensued between the companions that were there and Umar, and we would not be having this conversation. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala truly is amazing. When he does this to your life, always ask yourself, when you're going through something, it was meant to be that way. The cutter of Allah, I often describe it when you have a surfer's on a wave. The wave is the cutter of Allah. You've got to navigate the right way and tame it. You've got to work within it morally, righteously within your principles, because it's coming. The tests are coming. The challenges are coming. You're being steered to a point, where you're going. And that's exactly what was happening to Umar. So as he came in, they grabbed him, obviously, by the arms because they were not sure. And he professed right then and there. He took his shahada, and Umar is a Muslim. Islam was now blessed. As the Messenger Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, please bless Islam with Umar. Because the Messenger of Allah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam saw something in Umar. His passion, of course, his literacy, his articulation, his courage. This guy would be unbelievable asset to Islam. And now I tell people, Islam had muscle at this point. You had Hamza and you had Umar within 3 days. So the days of the pagans attacking simple, gentle men like Abu Bakr and the women that they were torturing. We talked stories about that a few lectures ago, about the first martyr in Islam was a woman. They could bully and pick on gentle, soft-spoken people. But were they going to bully and pick on anymore Umar ibn al-Khattab and Hamza? Umar allowed the Muslims to go to the Kaaba and pray openly for the first time because the Quraysh did not want to cross. They didn't want to go there, so to speak, lack of a better term. So now Islam had muscle. There was only 39 Muslims at the point in time that Umar had converted. Only 39. So we're still talking about a 6-year period of time where not a lot of people were coming in. The message was not going, but the messenger, of course, did not give up. He was on the course all the way, but 39 Muslims total at this period of time. So when we talked about Abu Bakr and the Messenger of Allah Sallallahu migration to Medina, we talked about the careful planning. We talked about how they snuck out the back door, how he hired guides, how they hid in a cave. Not Umar. When Umar decided he wanted to take his migration, Umar did it as only Umar could. He grabbed his sword, he flicked it on his shoulder, and he walked right in, and he made the slowest tawaf to the Kaaba, the circumambulations as possible.
7 times.
Yeah, 7 times. He prayed as long a rakaz as he could. What are you going to do? I'm leaving. No one dared to lift a finger. So we see again a different man, different type of approach. But Umar was fearless. you know, in this way. And he walked in with that swagger and that style that, you know, I'm on the right path, you're on the wrong. What are you going to do to stop me? And of course, nobody, as I said, lifted a finger.
Okay, now Umar said actually in Kaaba, if you want your wife to your kids to be a widow, and your wife to have another person to marry her, come and fight. Everybody when possible will lose my kids, and somebody will marry my wife. Yes, Umar, mashallah.
Yeah. And we keep on getting, and we're going to get to the other side of Umar, which is just, again, amazing, the duality of him. You know, one side, he was this man. The other side, he was the most humble and gentle and most, you know, you say unbiased judge that we've had in Islamic history. Now, a story happened, though, however, during his migration. This story shows his generosity. He had traveled with 3 companions, was the original plan, who were going to migrate to Medina with him. One of those went by the name of Ayyash ibn Rabi'a. And they had reached Medina. The first gentleman had backed off because he'd already been kind of coerced into the Quraysh. So it was just Umar and Ayyash had went to Medina. And when they got there, this gentleman was the half-brother of Abu Jahl. Abu Jahl, another gentleman, they came to Medina, and they started pulling at the heartstrings of Ayyash. They said, your mother, she said she will not comb her hair again, basically, until you return. They came after him. You've got to come back. Your mother misses you. Umar bin Khattab was not buying it. And he offered half his wealth to Ayyash to stay. He said, brother, I will give you half my wealth. I was getting in my pocket's driving me crazy. Sorry for the interruption. My son, I think, was spamming me. So hearing ching, 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 ching. So back to you. So he had offered half his wealth. That's how much love he had for his brother, because he did not trust these guys. And Ayyash had said to him, you know, thank you, but I cannot do this to my mother. And you know, of course, you know, you talked about this in a very good khutbah yesterday, the importance of the mother. Yes. You know, in Islam, and how much we value the mother, what the Messenger of Allah ﷺ had to say about our obligations to our mother. And you really can't blame Ayyash for trying. Umar said, okay, I'm going to give you a fast camel. Never let them get behind you. And sure enough, he dropped his guard down. Abu Jahl asked him for something. He got off the camel. They tied him up. They took him back to, you know, Mecca. But the reason, again, raising that point was that we could see how much he cared. He knew they were going to do this. He had that intuition. We're going to get to his intuition here in a minute with the way that he was always ahead on revelation. We need a revelation for this. He would go to the messenger, and you would see basically Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would raise the situation that was perfect for that revelation. Umar had this intuition, you know, about him that helped him in his judgments. So he became a student of knowledge. As I mentioned earlier, he shadowed the messenger. We talked about this. He was one of the 13 men that we have the ayah of the caravan, of following the pleasures of the world. We talked about in our Abu Bakr lecture. The caravan came, everyone left the masjid. They left the messenger standing there because they wanted access to the shiny goods. Abu Bakr stayed. Umar was another of the 13 who had stayed. Umar would shadow the messenger, said he would pick up an ayah. Not only would he pick up the ayah, he would ask the messenger about every single word. When Umar would recite Quran, he said, when the messenger said when, he meant when. When the messenger said this, he meant this. He left nothing for interpretation. He was always constantly asking questions. And that was that part about learning that ayah and then applying it, that he learned every word of the ayah, every meaning. Is there a hidden meaning here? Is this symbolism? Is this, or is this direct? And there are so many examples, you know, of him being able to do this. So much so that we find several, as I was mentioning, ayah in the Quran were revealed based on questions that came from Umar. The first one, the hijab. Yes. The hijab came from Umar. One of the other famous ones, we'll get to Badr in a minute, was the funeral prayer. The Messenger of Allah was going to offer the funeral prayer on the head of the hypocrites. This gentleman went by the name of Abdullah ibn Ubay. And Umar said, Messenger of Allah, no. I mean, what are you doing? This man is a hypocrite, munafiq. What are you doing? The Messenger of Allah, having the heart that he had, you know, still always believed there was good to be had in everyone. It was going to go and offer, you know, that funeral prayer. Later on, we would get 2 revelations coming. You know, you find it in Surah Tawbah 980. You know, and then you found it again in 84 to 87, stating that you were not allowed to pray over kafir and hypocrites. And you had talked about that when we were doing the burial,
Yes.
you know, last week, of the importance of understanding that.
Yes.
And how important that is. So this all came, again, Umar had raised those questions. Now, a lot of those guys we talked about last time, the Shia, will say these are obviously fraudulent hadiths to justify Umar. They will say, how dare Umar overrule the Prophet, and you're saying that that legitimately happened. It wasn't overruling. It was the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this is an endless race. The Messenger of Allah conveyed his message. He was perfect in what he did, but you have to groom the next generation. You have to groom the people also at the same time who are going to be able to carry the torch, you know, of Islam, having people who are ready, you know, to assume that responsibility. And clearly in Umar, we had such a person. And then, of course, it came really to a head, you can see, in the prisoners of Badr. In the Battle of Badr, Umar had killed his own uncle, his own flesh and blood. That was how committed he was. At that point, even, not even that far in to his Islam, that he was willing to fight his own family member.
The Badr, the first battle, Badr was 17th month of Ramadan. Yeah, the first battle. Yeah.
So after the Battle of Badr, the Muslims were triumphant. We will probably do videos in the future on the Battle of Badr and all the lessons. It's very, very good stories to be told there. But you had all these prisoners, 70 of them. The Messenger of Allah, Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and Abu Bakr, being the kind-hearted men they were, they wanted to ransom off, you know, these prisoners back to the Quraysh. You know, and Umar's judgment was, no, we should set a message here. We should send them that what you have done to us and what you're continuing to do is not going to be tolerated. Well, the Messenger of Allah, Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, listened to Abu Bakr, and they both took the stance of sending the prisoners through ransom back. Later on, we would have ayah, you know, handed down the Quran. We find it in Surah Al-Anfal 867 to 68, which saying it is not becoming of a prophet to take prisoners of war. And this is a very famous ayah. Now, the irony of that is, if you go to Uhud, you know, later, how many Muslims die in Uhud? 70. You know, so it shows, again, the wisdom behind this, because a lot of Christians will use this ayah and say, look, Islam is violent. Even though I could go on for 2 hours of all the violent battles in just the first 5 books of the Old Testament. But they will raise those issues. They will say, look, kill the captives. Those captives went right back and fought you again. So if you don't do something, you want to ultimately have peace, and you have an enemy who's prepared to fight you, who's prepared to steal your property, kick you out of town, boycott you, starve your children. If you don't do this, all you're doing is letting them go to come right back at you again. So again, we see the deeper wisdom, you know, behind it that was shown off there. And the Messenger Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and Abu Bakr were crying when this ayah came down, because they didn't want to do it. They felt there was still hope that these were their kinsmen, they could save them. So they had that aspect there as well. One more from Umar we find, the prohibitions of alcohol. Umar was responsible, raising constantly to the Messenger of Allah ﷺ about, you know, what are we going to do about alcohol? You know, because Umar had drank. Umar had been around people who drank. He understood. Me, as someone in my period of time has been exposed to alcohol, I know the grip that it has on. It is not something that's very like the movies. You convert and immediately it's magic and you give it up all. Some people it is. For me, it was a struggle. I had been drinking for 10 plus years. You know, I had a marriage to that poison, you know, and it was not easy for me to get off. And Umar knew, the Messenger of Allah so obviously knew, and Allah, of course, the ultimate judge, knew. And that's why we had the progressive revelation about slowly phasing the alcohol out of the culture. Now we're banning it. Here is a had punishment, you know, for its consumption. And we would see, and I'll get into that when we talk about Umar the judge.
Okay, new Muslims here.
I'm sorry.
The liquor, by the way, in the beginning, Allah la taqrabu as-salata wa antum sukara. You want to pray when you are drunk. And after 3 stages, and after that, when he migrated to Medina, is prohibited to carry it, to drink it, to sell it, to be part of it, period. But after what? After a period of time, until the rules and regulation in Medina Munawwara, become no. But in that case, only don't pray, don't drink when you, even when you enter Medina also, not at in the beginning. With the Islam becomes stronger, become prohibited completely, the liquor. Yeah.
Yeah, and he understood again that if you came at people and said, stop, you would have lost quite a bit. But just again, that gradual, reduction. We find Umar at all the major battles. He was at Khaybar. He was in the Battle of the Trench. He was at Uhud. In Uhud, we know his value because when the Muslims had gotten routed, when Abu Sufyan came to the front, the first thing he was calling out to was the Messenger of Allah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Then he called to Abu Bakr. Then he called to Umar. He was hoping those three, or one of those three, was going to speak or was dead. Actually, obviously hoping that they were all deceased. And if Umar says his famous line here, when he says, know that your dead are in hell and know that our dead are in paradise. You had that famous line being shouted from behind, the mountain in the direction of the pagans. One of the qualities we see also emerging from Umar is after his post-conversion was he was quick to strike. You read any Sahih Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, you will find numerous hadiths where Umar is like, Messenger of Allah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, can I please strike his neck? Let me strike the hypocrite. He was again so passionate and just so full of vigor. And the Messenger of Allah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, would have to calm him down. No, Umar, let's give him a chance. Let's go through this situation a little bit more calmly. And you would find that was, again, kind of the conditioning and the training that was going on. As we're going to see when he becomes the Khalifa later on, the patience. It's almost a 180, a 360, you could say, of his character and how it changed under the tutelage of the Messenger of Allah. From very, very high, strong, and aggressive to being calm and calculated in his decision-making. We start seeing that during this period of time, as well. He was president of the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. We would have time to go into that. It's a very long story. That will come up later in other lectures as we're running out of time, obviously. But he rejected the treaty. Long story short, the Treaty of Hudaybiyah was between the pagans and the Muslims. He did not...
Or the pagans, Quraysh, with Prophet Muhammad born, that area, the pagan. Yeah.
So this treaty, long story short, was very favorable to the Quraysh. We'll go through the details in one of our other historical lectures about what was all in the provisions of that. Most of the Sahaba asked the Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what are you doing? Why are you signing this? Umar was the most fiercest in rejecting this treaty. But this was told, again, divinely from above. And as we will see when we get into Sirah, how this treaty ultimately helped for Islam to conquer and to triumph. So he was present there. Half his wealth is one of the examples of his charity in the Tabuk expedition. He donated half his wealth, which was the largest at the time until a man by the name of Abu Bakr came behind him and donated 99.9% of his wealth. And Umar and Abu Bakr, I talked about this briefly in the Abu Bakr presentation. They had this kind of game against each other of who could do the better deeds, which is not harmful by any means, obviously. And they had that competitive, relationship. Umar would marry his daughter, Hafsa, to the Messenger of Allah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Hafsa would become, one of the better wives. The Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, would always refer to her as having the best in charity and doing good deeds for the people. She had a very kind heart. The story behind that, he had originally offered her to Abu Bakr, and Abu Bakr rejected. Then he offered her to basically Uthman. Uthman rejected also. Then you finally... they came to him because Umar was angry. He's like, why are you rejecting my daughter? What is wrong with my daughter? And they said, we only did this because we heard the Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, had spoke so fondly of her. So the Messenger of Allah proposed to her. So this, of course, would make him at this point the brother-in-law, of the Messenger.
Something very important. The Shia accusing Aisha and her father, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, and also Hafsa. And her father Abu Bakr Siddiq, and those the Ummahat al-Mu'mineen, the wife of Rasulullah, with our mothers, revealed ayat in the Quran, Surah Al-Ahzab, about those women. Shia reject those ayat in the Quran, period. That's why Shia, whoever rejects this ayat in the Quran, he is not Muslim. Okay, sorry for that.
No worries. Now we're about to get to the Shia, unfortunately, here in a minute, because we have to with some of the events that are about to be discussed. The Shia even go as far as to saying Hafsa and Aisha killed the messenger. There are some Shia groups who have hadiths that say this, that they collectively poisoned him. I've seen this. I've seen it in their lectures, and I've read it with my own eyes. So they even go as far as to say that Umar hated the messenger so much and was an infiltrator that he sent his daughter to go into the household to poison the messenger. So you have it. It goes beyond the pale. When the messenger spoke so fondly of her, and there's so many statements of him saying these things. Now we have the famous hadith I mentioned earlier, comes up around this period of time. The messenger of Allah was in a home, and Umar enters the home, and the women ran. People would run when Umar sometimes would enter into a building. And the messenger of Allah started laughing. And he said, you walked in and they ran. And he's like, messenger, you're the one they should be running from, not me. He said, but Umar, you got away with people. I mean, these women are running from you. And he made the classic line. He said, the shaitan even runs from you. Yeah. You're walking this side of the street, the shaitan runs to the other side. You just have this way. And this, again, is part of that metamorphosis, which we're going to cover a lot next week in part 2, when we see how his heart had become soft. And we're going to get to that as we close here. Now, I have to talk about the Shia. We have what I've called the paper controversy. As the Messenger ﷺ was laying on his bed, dying, feeling the pains of death ever approaching, there is a famous hadith where he asked for a piece of paper to write on. Now, the Shia claimed that this was to give Ali the Khalifa. Umar makes the famous comment where he says, this man, because the messenger was in and out of reality, and Umar did not want anything on the paper to be twisted or misconstrued. He was not in his right mind. He said, let the man be, pretty much. He is not in a desirable state. He's feeling the pains of death. The Shia will say that he was going to write, make Ali the leader, on the piece of paper, and that's why they stopped it. If the Messenger ﷺ, when we talked about this with Abu Bakr, was so convinced of that, I think he would have done it when he had Abu Bakr leading the Salah. He would have came out and said, Ali is the leader, but Abu Bakr is leading the Salah today.
Plus, Rasulullah, he can't write or read. The accused, he wrote that, but he cannot write or read. Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he illiterate. They write everything revealed from Allah to him in purpose. If you write and read, that means this Quran is easy to write it down.
Yeah.
See? So that's why whoever accusing Abu Bakr Siddiq and Umar to poison Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is a false statement, and plus he's not a Muslim, period. Sorry.
The word is great. There is a famous hadith to show again the type of character that Umar had and how the Messenger of Allah viewed him. The Messenger of Allah told a story about him in a dream that he had saw where he was drinking milk, and he was consuming the milk in massive quantities, so much so that the milk was oozing out of his fingertips. And he handed the jar of milk to Umar to drink the rest, and Umar had drank the rest of the milk. And the companions around him said, "Oh, Messenger of Allah, what does that dream mean? What is the milk?" He said, "Knowledge. That I basically consumed as much knowledge as I could directly from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through Jibreel. Umar basically was consuming the leftover, the knowledge from me, applying it." And this was, again, the kind of esteem that he had.
And Umar's kids as well. Abdullah ibn Umar, this one, a hadith sahihah from Abdullah, the son of Umar al-Khattab.
Yeah, a lot of the next parts, obviously, we're going to go forward to his Khalifa now, because we talked about in Abu Bakr's life, Umar's role a couple of weeks ago. He was an advisor. He was very instrumental in, after the Battle of Qaniyah, when all the reciters had started to die, of making sure that we now could have the Quran codified into a book. Abu Bakr was reluctant to do that. He said the Messenger of Allah had never done this. And Umar said, no, this is a good thing. He was very, blunt when it came to doing that. And throughout Abu Bakr's Khalifa, he was always part of the shuras. He was always involved in the consultations. He always was right there next to Abu Bakr. So when Abu Bakr was feeling his pains of death, he had suggested to the companions, and the Shia again will twist it, and they will say there was an arrangement made in Saqifa between Abu Bakr and Umar that, hey, I'm going to promote you this time, but when you give it up, you're going to give it to me. Abu Bakr did a shura, before he said to the companions, I think, first he asked them, what do you think? They deferred back to him. They said, oh, Khalifa, you know, you are the best to make that determination, not us.
I mean, he choose.
Yeah.
Umar, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, he choose Umar.
After asking all the companions who deferred back to him, he said, well, what do you think about Umar? Only one man said, and the only thing he rejected, he's like, don't you think he might be a bit too harsh? That was the only criticism that had been determined.
Correct.
It was unanimous consensus. There was no issues in taking the bay'ah, you know, to Umar, the pledges, you know, of allegiance. There was no fighting, no anything like that. Like the Shia will make you believe that Ali ran away and was living in seclusion. And this leads to one of the controversial incidents I want to cover before we go to the close. And that is the Door of Fatima attack. Have you who sure undoubtedly have heard of this? The Shia accused Umar of murder. They claim that during the life of Abu Bakr, that Ali refused to pledge. We covered that in the Abu Bakr presentation. They claim that Umar and a group of people had went to the house of Ali and Fatima, and they knocked down the door on top of Fatima.
By the way, this is false state. The Shia just created this story. They created not an untruthful story. Right.
And I always thought this was interesting because in that time in Arabia, wood was not common. The Messenger of Allah, I talked about, he had a curtain in his door. When the Messenger of Allah met Zainab, they had a curtain in their house. Most people at that time had a curtain. So to me, the hadith, even despite the fact it's never been authenticated, also you have some really weird peculiarities, you know, about it. Why is there a big wooden door in Arabia? And Ali was a very humble man. Doors were for fortresses and for kings, you know, during that period of time. So that's always something that I had thought about was a bit odd, you know, about the story. But they claim that Umar is a murderer. And in fact, they say that he is one of 5 men who is in the lowest pit, you know, of the hellfire, and some of their famous hadiths based on this false story. So I had to throw that out there because I don't want new Muslims to come across some of this stuff and then think, wait, I heard, you know, Brother Yusuf say these great things about Umar, but he killed Fatima. You know, he killed Fatima's baby. And you know, these stories are completely fabricated. There was no basis from them at all. And they don't make a lot of sense when you really break down and analyze them. So when Umar took the minbar for the first time as a Khalifa, Abu Bakr made sure to sit one step below the Messenger of Allah. Umar had so much respect for both of them. He said, I will sit one step below Abu Bakr. So when he sat on the minbar, he sat one step lower than Abu Bakr because of his admiration for him. He assumed the Khalifa. He made a very powerful statement, which is going to set the tone for part 2. He prayed to the people, asking Allah for guidance, that I want to be fair to you in all matters of wealth, of inheritance, of judicial, of enforcement, of everything. I owe you under Allah, you owe me under Allah. Let's basically fulfill our obligations. Very passionate, short but long, you know, speech. He also made a dua where he asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for leniency, to be lenient, to be better in dealing with the people, not to be so harsh, not to be so tough. And it was a very, I guess, spiritual moment, you know, that took place in there of his declaration to the people, what I owe you, what my duties are to you, what you expect from me, and this is what I expect from you. I know I'm harsh. I know I've had that problem. And he made a dua right there for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant him leniency. And we are going to see in part 2, as we go through his judgments and his virtues, how much that dua was truly, you know, granted. I was running out of time. I could have gone another 5 minutes.
Brother Yusuf actually mentioned in the beginning about the masajid, many masajid in time Umar. In fact, Umar ibn al-Khattab radiyallahu Umar ibn al-Khattab, okay, radiyallahu anhu, he's the one conquered and take over al-Masjid al-Aqsa.
Yeah.
Al-Masjid al-Aqsa, I'm going to speak about it inshallah in the future. Plus, when you enter Masjid al-Aqsa, before you enter Masjid al-Aqsa, there's a masjid there called Masjid Umar. Inshallah, all of you, inshallah, everybody, he just came from Palestine, from Al-Quds. Although you enter Masjid Umar, until now they honor Umar ibn Khattab because the first masjid in Palestine in that time. And also when he went back to Arabia, there's a Masjid Umar also in Gaza, in my city. May Allah give rahmah to my father. Every Eid you have to pray Masjid Umar because the Masjid Umari. In that area in Palestine, in Gaza Strip, in my city, they used, before Islam, Umar used to have a place like a garage, like a taxi and business in that area in Palestine. This one of the raised Sahaba into Palestine, plus he liberate Palestine. The second one, Salah ad-Din Ayyub. May Allah liberate Palestine again and again. If you have any question, Sunnahfollowers, and here inshallah, if you have any question.
One more if I wanted, I just wanted a small line.
Yeah.
Part two, we were going to go through, Umar was the first to create a police force. We are going to talk about that. His justice system was not duplicated in the West until you could say the 18th century. We're going to go through that. We are going to go through the plague and the droughts that inflicted him during his Khalifa, how he managed that, how he had to suspend the hard punishments, the controversies. We are going to talk about Mutta. There's another controversial issue with our Shias, companions there, if you will.
Mut'ah does mean the marry a woman with money, without a guardian, without money. That's for a few hours, and that's it. That's mut'ah. The Shia right now, they're doing the same thing. They won't contract, marry her for hour, 2 hours, and that's it.
Sometimes 20 minutes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, after sex, that's it. She's divorced. That's the Shia. By the way, they're doing that right now. Not in Canada. Here. Oh, by the way, people from Canada came here just to listen to you.
Oh,
today.
Yeah, so I hope everybody tunes in for part two. We got 3 parts. So part two, we're going to look at the infrastructure that he built and all of his accomplishments as the Caliph. Part 3, we're going to look to that ultimate triumph of Jerusalem and, of course, his unfortunate martyrdom.
May Allah gather all of us with Abu Bakr as-Siddiq and Umar and Uthman and Ali. May Allah gather all of us with Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and all the companions of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala destroy those whoever accused Ali, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq and Umar or Uthman and Ashab. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala destroy those people. Ameen, ameen, ya Rabbi. Go ahead. Sunnahfollowers, you have any question for Brother Yusuf, not me, because the time is running fast.
No, there is no question. Jazakallah khair, brother.
Any question here? Alhamdulillah. Brother Yusuf, Jazakallah khair. May Allah gather all of us with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, inshallah. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. آمين. جزاكم الله خير.